I think the height of my professional career was when Jack Thompson called me a child pornographer. This is a few years ago. This is like The Sims had like this nude patch thing going on, and somebody clued him into it, and he, of course, he made a big deal out of it. So, but I took that as a badge of honor, actually, which makes me now an unemployed child pornographer. Now, the title of this talk, I'm probably not even going to talk about metaphysics at all, but I just want to explain to you kind of why I came up with that. One of the most influential books I read as a young adult, or about 15 years old, I read this book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And on the surface, it was about this guy who was kind of a philosopher, very into motorcycles, kind of recounting his kind of journey through philosophy. And he talked about, starting with motorcycles, how the mindset you bring to a motorcycle when you have to repair it or troubleshoot it is very, very different than the mindset you want to take when you're enjoying riding through the countryside on a warm summer day. They're just totally different mindsets, but they both capture some elements of the truth, but neither one is the full truth. He actually kind of goes deeper and deeper in kind of the, basically the history of Western thought, starting with Aristotle, and kind of reductionism, how we break the world down into known components, a very deconstructionist approach to understanding the world, which is very different than the Eastern philosophies, which are much more holistic, embracing everything experientially. From there, I really kind of got the idea that there is no really one truth of anything without looking at multiple directions of it, multiple interpretations. Every one of these kind of perspectives or viewpoints captures some element of the truth, and the more perspectives you can gather, the better on almost anything. And through my career, I've actually found that perspectives are far more valuable than solutions for the most part. Whenever I get kind of an intractable design problem, I try to look at it from every possible angle and through every possible lens, and I talk to other people about it and get a sense of how they think about it, how they see it. And so through my life, I felt like I've really gone through my life collecting lenses. How can I take anything and look at it 100 different ways? And I got into digital photography about 10 years ago and started realizing that, in some ways, photography for me was kind of like getting training wheels for my eye. Because when you carry a camera around, you start looking at scenes differently. You start thinking, what's a really interesting perspective on that thing that's very common, that I see all the time, but how can I look at it in a new and interesting way? And pretty soon, you can just throw away the camera, and you're starting to see the world differently. The camera, carrying it around, the act of it, forces you to think in terms of shifting perspectives, unusual, ways of looking at things. But it's a great skill, and so, now I don't even carry my camera with me, but I'm always going around kind of thinking how I would photograph things when I see them visually. In some ways, it's kind of like a gateway drug, or gateway art, in that you can kind of take that a little bit deeper in conceptual areas as well. I think one of the interesting things that I like about entertainment is that it can give you different perspectives on very common things. When you think about story perspectives, Gotham City, as a city, you kind of get this perspective from Batman. Play experiences, you can play with the city, toy blocks, and get a totally different perspective on it. Their visual perspectives, systemic perspectives. All these are different ways of looking at kind of the same thing. This is actually one of my favorite old videos. I don't know if you've ever seen this. This is just a little section of this movie by Royksopp. And it's a music video, but it's actually just a really cool little kind of blending of this woman's average day, living her life, going to the city. But it's done very structurally, so as you're going through this video, you get this kind of perspective on things in an almost systemic way. I'll show you a little bit of it. That's just a short clip from that. And the reason I wanted to show it to you is that I guess it's kind of like an affliction, but when I move around in an urban environment, that's what I'm seeing. That's the way I think. Every time I see something, I'm deconstructing it. I'm imagining the systemic flows, the patterns, the commute things, the technology behind the tunnel. And it's very distracting in a way, but also very fun. I think games are one of the main reasons I kind of see the world in that way. You can just take, again, a city, and I can imagine the way I saw a city playing Civilization, there's a very historical context, and it's in a regional perspective, compared to the other cities near it. Or something like Grim Fandango, where you're embedded in the city, and it's a very dramatic storytelling thing, and it's very culturally rich. SimCity, which is much more of a toy, with a systemic understanding of all the kind of pipes and things that connect, and the flows that happen through a city. Or something like Grand Theft Auto, that's a much more tactile, kind of physical, immersive, me living in these neighborhoods. Each one of these has given me a different perspective on a real-life object, that when I go out into a city, I think what I'm seeing was informed by all these play experiences I've had. But of course, these are all just different types of abstractions of what we think of as a city. Now, in terms of the imagery, we tend to get imagery in two main ways, kind of mechanically capturing it like photography, and artistically creating it, which is a much older form, And I really think of one of these as, captured imagery and synthetic imagery. Now, these captured worlds that we build are really the basis of our film industry. And the game industry has really been born out of the synthetic worlds. And now we're starting to see this interesting blending between these two forms. These blended worlds are things that are, going to be happening in our games, and they're already happening on film. This is one area in which film, I think, is kind of ahead of games. You can think of, images captured synthetic. You can also think of realities almost the same way. We have actual realities and imagined realities. So captured actual, historical photographs, or even a snapshot you might take in your backyard. Synthetic actual reality, like a portrait photograph, or a 3D model. So these are things that really exist in the world that we've recreated synthetically. Then we have imagined realities. It used to be that we photographically captured little, models of X-Wing fighters to make a movie like Star Wars, or little lizards, dressed as dinosaurs to make a dinosaur movie. And our games typically fall in this bottom quadrant down here, imagined worlds with synthetic imagery. Now, I don't know if you've seen this show, Life After People. This is actually kind of an interesting example. And this is basically, if humans all disappeared one day, what would happen to the world? They go into famous cities, like Paris or Las Vegas, and show this is what would happen, 50 years later, 100 years later. Really, the show should be called Watching the World Slowly Rot. They basically follow these cities for 1,000 years until the buildings start falling down. But it's kind of interesting because they're actually starting up here with actual reality, captured imagery, and then transitioning it down here to synthetic imagined, realities and imagery. And I think the really interesting stuff that's happening, in movies and in games is going to be moving toward the middle here. As we start blending these things, where we can kind of blend between our actual reality and synthetic realities, using a combination of captured imagery and synthetic imagery. But we also have the ability to have it be interactive, tactile, where we can go in and interact with it and touch it. This is already really starting to happen. This is kind of the whole, augmented reality thing that, really is going to be happening on smart mobile devices. At some point we might have these, really advanced, headgear, etc., and things on the drawing board are even more advanced. But it seems pretty clear that, we're going to have this to some degree, and it's happening already. A lot of the games that we've been dealing with up to this point have been more in the realms of symbolic manipulation. And, these are things that are a bit more abstract, a bit in kind of the outer cerebral cortex of our brain in terms of the way we think about playing a game, the strategy of it. I think because of these new technologies and this blending of the real and the synthetic, that we're going to start moving a little bit deeper into the brain, into the perceptual realm. Obviously, we have a lot of data that's available that we can kind of overlay on reality. And I think a lot of people are going to start using this, just for purely utilitarian purposes. We're seeing it already just, seamlessly invade our world, in television. The imaginary first down line in football, and Olympics was using it a lot as well. But we're already getting this. When you think about your perception of the world around you, and how much of that is coming through the net, basically, from there, local communities, or even online communities, your local neighborhoods, and even your friends. So in some sense, your perception of the world around you is more and more being moderated by these network experiences, these virtual kind of areas. Now, I think, one of the next areas is going even deeper into the brain, where the game experiences become very, very personal. And, where that goes, I'm not sure, but I think that's really the most exciting thing about where games are going to be going.